Welcome to the afternoon session that is probably the most important one to me, where we get these gentlemen to talk to us about their lifetime and wartime experiences and continue to teach all of us youngsters how to do the job that needed to be done. Before we get started, I would like to introduce what I hope will become a new member for us, Lloyd Rennie. Would you stand up? I'm sorry, Steve Rennie. My apologies. Exactly, yes. He went to the trouble to find us, so to speak. And his uncle, Lloyd, sorry, I'm the one who confused the name. His uncle, Lloyd, crash landed on a raid to Honshu. But he has located us, and we now welcome him into the Six Bomb Group and hope he will attend the rest of our reunions until there aren't any more, which will be quite some time. Good, and we welcome you. We're always happy to find a new member. I don't know Colonel Murphy, but if he'll stand up here, we'll introduce him. Colonel Murphy, I'm John Creek. You are with the
142nd. 143rd Fighter Squadron right there at Portland International Guard Base.
Excellent. We welcome you as well.
Thanks so much.
Now I'd like to turn this over to David. He has a wonderfully assembled list of questions that we hope will propagate wonderful information out of these gentlemen. So, David, it's all yours.
Thank you, John, and welcome. Glad to have everybody here. Before we get started, I would like to say something about Steve. He has really done a lot of research on his uncle's B-29 history. He's got a lot of information here, which he's going to share with us in the history room after this. His uncle was on the Preston crew, and as I recall, they were the first Six Bomb Group B-29 to land on Tinian. And so he was on that crew. He has lots of information back there, stuff that I'm sure you'll find interesting because I've never seen most of it myself. So, and not that I'm an expert by any means, but I do a lot of it, trying to study it. So we get started. Thought we'd start off with a few softball questions for you guys, but then they're going to get tougher as the day goes on. So I hope you had your Wheaties for breakfast. From Phil Crowther, Phil wanted to know, he said, I've always wondered about their social lives. Most of the vets were just kids when they enlisted. What was your favorite song, Mr. Morgan, at the beginning of the war?
Well, I remember it started out with, I don't know the name of Rosie. Dozy and little something or other.
Oh, Dozy. The lamb beside me.
I have no idea. That was way back and forth. I tell you, I like to listen to Boogie Woogie. And I listen to a lot. My son played it a lot. So let's call it Boogie Woogie.
I'm with Bob. I can't remember the songs that were singing during the war.
One I remember was I'm going to move way out in the outskirts of town. I don't want nobody messing around my door.
I know the one my navigator used to sing, but if I had just a minute, I could think of it.
Okay. Go ahead, sing a bar or two.
I can't. I would be delighted to if I could. In the cool, cool, cool of the evening, tell 'em I'll be there.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question. We'll start from that end and work back. Do you remember any movies of the time that of that era that you really enjoyed?
Oh, the Yellow Rose of Texas. How's that?
Oh, very good.
Gone with the Wind.
Okay.
I don't remember a movie, but I do remember we had the people coming over and putting on shows for us. And at our movie theater on Tinian, one time we had a band and had this gorgeous blonde. Oh, she's up there, had a lovely, lovely long gown on. Of course, it was slid up to the waist on the side, so when she walked out, you could see all the leg. And of course, we were all GIs, hadn't seen a woman in a year or more, and she sang in a monotone. She had the worst voice I've ever heard in my life. And she got 5 encores.
I remember back to his story. We were watching a movie, I think it was with Betty Grable or somebody, and it was just getting to a good part, and a 29 went over. And you couldn't hear anything. And the guy says something about turn it up, and somebody else yelled, well, what do you want, egg in your beer? I mean, that was...
I don't remember any individual movies, but I was, in high school, I was a movie machine operator. All you really paid attention to was when it was time to put the next reel in and get it up to speed as one was running off. You didn't pay attention to the movie, so I guess I'm that way. I haven't been to, the last movie I've seen in my life was the one about the Hindenburg, but I guess about 30 years ago, the last time.
Okay, next question from Phil Crowther. How many of you married the girl back home, or did you meet your future wife at a US at a dance or something like that while you were in the Army?
Well, I guess I was married when I went in the service. I was an old guy. I was 23 years old, the second oldest man on the crew. So I don't want to say more than that about the girls I remember.
Well, maybe you've heard the story. I was an air cadet. They sent me up to Superior, Wisconsin, to the school up there for my cadet training. And they had a mixer. And I picked my wife out of the mixer. And ever since then, then the other thing was, I picked her out of the mixer because I pushed another guy out of the way. But to add to that kind of, she worked in the Neisner's 10-cent store downtown in Superior. And I always said I married a $1 million baby in a diamond store.
I suppose I was one of those you're looking for because I married a girl from Grand Island. We were married in Grand Island after the war. I met her at the swimming pool, on the Grand Island swimming pool. She was sitting on one side of the pool with her sister, and I was on the other side. And being a young 19-year-old buck, I dove in, swam underwater, and came up right ahead of them, and looked up and said, "Hi, who are you?" And she said, "I'm Lois Smith." And I said, "Great, I'm one of the Jones boys," because I thought she was giving me a runaround. But her name was Smith. She worked as a teller in the bank downtown in Grand Island. We dated while I was still in the States. After the war was over, and I came home and married her. And she and I enjoyed married life for 54 years until she died of brain cancer. And I found, interestingly enough, when my wife died, never felt more lonely in my entire life after 54 years. And I had 4 kids, we had 4 kids by then. And I'm sure, they're knowing how lonely I was, they thought I was going to marry some young bimbo. And sure enough, I did. Max was one of her best friends. Max married my best friend in high school. We double dated after she got married to Pete. And Peter died about 16, 17 years ago, and my wife died of brain cancer about the same time, and so we started talking. So Max and I have been married for 15 years.
Yeah.
My story is very similar to Warren's. I was in the cadet program, and we were stationed at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. And at that time, there were very few male guys that anybody would want to pay attention to on campus. So the sororities went together and decided to have a dance for the cadets. And so in the gym, they had this very nice dance, and I met my future wife. I didn't know it at the time, but Virginia and I dated a little bit, and we decided we would get married after the war was over. And so I think it was 8 or 9 days after I got out of the Army, we got married, and we had 66 years together. She died 4 years ago, and I'm probably gonna have the record of the oldest remarried veteran. We got married a year and a half ago, and happy we did.
My first wife was Margaret, and I was in B-29 training at the time, and I told my co-pilot that we were in Delhart, and I said, I'm going to ask Margaret to marry me when I get home. I told my parents, I'm going to ask Margaret to marry me when I get home. And come back and told my folks she turned me down. And next thing happened, I didn't write to girls while I was overseas or anything like that, but I knew she had a boyfriend in high school, and she and her boyfriend in high school, they were writing letters back and forth every day, and I figured that was probably the reason. Her answer was she didn't think her dad would think she was ready. Actually, she was way too young to be thinking about getting married, and I was ready. But I sent her a letter from Okinawa. It says, "Hope to see you soon." It was an Easter greeting, and I came home, and she was still acquainted, very well, closely acquainted with her high school sweetheart, but he was still in the service, and I got home a little bit early, and I beat him home, and I asked her to marry me, and beating him home was the best thing that ever happened.
Mr. Randall, I'll start back with you. And I'm sorry I did not introduce these gentlemen. I think most of us that were here last night, they introduced themselves very well last night. Mr. Randall, and he flew on the September 2nd mission over Tokyo Bay over the Missouri.
Yeah.
And Mr. Ed Vincent, would give us briefly yourself. You were an airplane commander.
I'm an airplane commander of an airplane named Black Alley Side.
Black Alley Side.
We flew 32 missions over Japan.
39th or 40th?
32.
32 missions, 39th Squadron or 40th?
40th.
40th Squadron. Mr. Higgins.
I was in the 39th Squadron, flew on the Lucky Strike.
I was in the 39th Squadron. We flew in a plane called Vulture. And we got in 31 missions and came home.
I was in the 40th Squadron, and I flew with several different crews, but primarily with ship number 54, and then I was a ground person also.
And he just introduced me.
Let's talk about the end of the war. This is from, and as you know, we've got the diaries of a lot of our crew members, and this is from the Central Fire Controller on my dad's crew. And he says, we hit the railroad yards at Marifu about 12 noon. We saw no flak or fighters. On the way home, we heard they had surrendered. Got back to base about 8 o'clock, or 2000. Then on 8:15, he said, we're still waiting for the official word of surrender. 8:16, he says, the war is over. My only comment in the diary was that I didn't feel any different now that it's over. Sounded like a strange comment to me. And I've read others where there were a lot of celebrations, etc. But what do you remember about when you heard I know that there was a time there where there was a debate about whether the August 14th mission was going to be flown because the Japanese had received the surrender proposal and they were negotiating back and forth. And I think it all had to do with Hirohito remaining in power. But
well, as I remember it, it was a sometime midday or early afternoon takeoff. And if I remember right, the 6th Bomb Group was supposed to be in the lead or someplace up front, and Colonel Gibson, I guess, came down in his Jeep, and he just held his hand up and said, 1 hour delay, 1 hour delay. And so the Colonel Comerford, or Captain Comerford was cussing, he says, I don't like these delays sitting here an hour. And about the time that they came down, we saw the Jeep working its way down. We were the second to last ship on the long strip, was a half mile away. We saw a bunch of 29s coming out of Guam. They had to come out of Guam south of us. Went overhead, they were climbing up 5, 6, 8,000 feet there climbing, and we were really chipping our teeth in, and they got down there, and he said, 1 hour delay, and we thought, what the heck is going on with these colonels and stuff, because they're delaying us, they were supposed to be in the lead, and some guys went by, 10 minutes ago. And about the time he got to the end, then he turned back and he started tooting his horn and stuff, and he'd run up and says, don't take off, don't start, wait to get orders. And we sat there, and about 20 minutes later, then we could hear all the yelling up at the other end of the thing. And about that time, we saw these Guam-based 29s coming back the other way. That's the way I remember the end of the thing.
Well, at the end of the war, we flew a mission, I think, while they were negotiating. But after that, when we came back, the first thing the pilot said was, we need one more mission. He says, if we get one more mission, we'll go home earlier. So we, some of you may have read in the book, we volunteered for a supply mission to the PWs in China. And we flew a mission. We had to fly up to Iwo Jima, stay all night. They loaded up the plane. And then we left from Iwo Jima because we didn't have enough gas to go from Tinian. So we flew into China, and we dropped our stuff at the PW place and then flew home. But that 31st mission, I came home in October.
I had an unusual experience because a month before the war ended, our crew, I'd had 22 missions over Japan by then, and our crew was selected to be a lead crew training. So we went back to the States in July and participated in bombing Los Angeles, San Francisco, and surrounding cities in anticipation of the lead crew. Lead crew, for those of you who don't know, in Europe, because they had so many planes and they'd done so much, after a while, rather than having individual planes go over Europe, they'd have one plane in the lead, and the rest of the formation followed that in formation. And when they get just before the targets, the lead plane would open its bomb bays, and all the rest of the planes would simultaneously open their bomb bays. Then when they were over the target, the lead bombardier dropped the bombs, and on his signal, all the rest of the planes dropped their bombs. The lead crew was obviously very important in that type of a pattern bombing, as they called it. So they had sent a number of us back to Muroc Field in Los Angeles, California, outside of Los Angeles, and we were part of the lead crew training. And as I say, we bombed Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other places in practice for our lead crew pattern bombing going back to Tinian. So I learned at the end of the war, when we were on our way back to Tinian, we left Los Angeles, we left Muroc area and Los Angeles, and we're probably on our way to Hawaii when we heard the war was over.
I flew the mission on August 14th to Marufu Railway Yards in northern Japan. And my recollection was it was a daylight raid. It was in the morning, and we came home in the afternoon. And we had heard that there had been an invitation to surrender accepted by the Japanese. I think there was still some negotiation maybe to go on, but anyway, that's where I was when it ended.
Actually, the war was over before I left the States, because we were in California ready to go over to Okinawa, and we had the latest B-29 we had brand new bombing equipment. We had a different radar set that was capable of bombing. We'd been in training, and we'd practiced bombing near Las Vegas. We bombed the Hoover Dam so often by photographs, and we were there, and I was in California ready to go, and we were gung ho, our whole crew was, and we were in California when the first atomic bomb was dropped. I said, well, what are we going to do now? Well, they probably and we figured, well, the war was probably going to be over very soon. And before I got to Tinian, the second bomb had been dropped. And we were in Tinian, and we were scheduled to go to Okinawa. We were going to go fight and win this war with our new and modern adjusted B-29, but they wouldn't let us. The Okinawa was not ready to have B-29s land on the landing strip yet. We weren't allowed to come. So we were on Tinian, and they were getting ready to make the big air show. I think, as I understand it, there were over 600 B-29s to go to the air show while they were signing the peace treaty over Tokyo Bay. We went up over, saw Mount Fujiyama out there, and went upstairs to the initial point, and turned around, and supposed to come back in formation. It really wasn't a formation, it's just a big celebration for it. But we were so glad to participate in that big air show that the B-29s put on in Tokyo Bay during the signing of the peace treaty. I talk too much.
No, sir, you're fine. You're doing what we want you to do. This is about you guys. This is from the diary of Newell Penniman. And as many of you know, Mr. Penniman was one of the founding organizers of the Six Bomb Group Association. And he had flown his 35th mission, and so they were going back to the States. And let me see. Okay, he said, upon hearing this, I grabbed the chance to navigate a war-weary B-29 to the good old USA. The B-29 was scheduled to leave on August 13th via Guam, Kwajalein, and the Hawaiian Islands. I said goodbye to all my crew, including Mackie, and left with a made-up crew on August 13th. We spent the night at Guam getting paperwork straightened out, orders covering the trip, and on August 14th, we took off for Kwajalein. About 5 hours along on the trip, the airplane commander, Captain Schwager, told me to turn my radio on to the commercial band. The station covered the military service radio stations. As I turned to that frequency, I heard our national anthem, and then the national anthem of all the Allied countries, and the announcement the Japanese had agreed to unconditional surrender. What an emotional time that must have been for you guys. Next thing I wanted to talk with you about was how many of you flew on the September 2nd mission over the USS Missouri? This is from the commander of my dad's crew, and he kept a diary. And he said, he said, yesterday as General MacArthur signed the peace on board the battleship Missouri, B-29s flew over the Tokyo Bay area. Formation after formation has started to assemble 75 miles north of Chosey Point about 9 a.m. From 3,000 to 7,000 feet, squadrons of ships assembled and move off to Tokyo. From our altitude of 6,700 feet, we could see Japan's mountainous terrain ridged and valleyed in an irregular way. It was beautiful. The roughness of the land leaves the roads and rivers wandering as they will between the hills. Every here and there, clusters of multi-sized thatched top houses dotted the scene. Occasional flat areas, farmland seemed to take its key from the mountains. From the air, property lines were as meandering as the streams. Huge bombed and burned out Tokyo was devastated to a degree beyond comprehensions. Fires had burned out blocks, burned them to the ground. They were literally level. For 3 hours, we circled an area roughly 30 to 40 miles long from Tokyo past Yokohama to Yokosuka Naval Base. Our third time around, Major Birkin leading and Captain Harp and I on either wing, we dropped to 1,200 feet. We could see bicycling Japs on the roads, roofs blown off factories, open fields where homes had stood. Other parts were untouched, and fireproof buildings appeared to have withstood the flames. The Emperor's Palace was unmolested, surrounded by moats. The harbor was filled with American and British fleets. In contrast, a sunken Jap ship lay on its side, victim of early American bombs. It was a sight and an occasion I'll long remember. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, was the consensus of opinion of everyone who was there. Do either of you gentlemen what are your recollections about flying over the USS Missouri on September 2nd?
Rather milk run kind of mission. Matter of fact, we couldn't count it as a combat mission because it wasn't. It was a show of force to humiliate the Japanese. And
Right.
we flew over, turned around, and flew back to Tinian and landed. That was it. We could see all the goings on down in the harbor in the Missouri and a lot of other ships, as you point out. But it wasn't real strong in my memory that was an important thing.
I would agree. I would agree with that same thing, but we were delighted to participate in that, and that's about all I have to say.
Yes, sir.
As an added comment, when it was announced on the island that the war, Europe was over, you never heard so much gunfire in your life. Anybody that had a gun went outside and shot it off. And they thought the Japanese had invaded us again. And I think the next day they took away our ammunition. So that was really an important time on the island because everybody wanted to celebrate the end of the war in Europe.
Next question, how did you get home? And when did you get home? Mr. Morgan.
Well, I finished the war short of enough missions to come home immediately, and so I had the honor about maybe 3 weeks after the war ended, they sent me down to Guam, and I was to be the flight engineer on the 29 going out of Northfield, Guam, back with a motley crew of the people that were left. You went out on a point system, so none of us knew each other. And despite all the things that had happened during the war, the most interesting takeoff I ever had was out of Northfield, Guam, which is now Anderson Air Force Base. And we just cleared off of the runway, the most critical part, and the number 3 propeller came right off of the right off the plane and just disappeared. And we were as heavy as you could be with no bombs or anything. We were heavy with fuel and had a couple of Bombay tanks aboard, so we were almost at, probably 135,000 pounds at least. And so we went right back in and landed the plane there very successfully, and I don't even remember the name of the pilot, and he, I'm sure, doesn't remember me, or maybe I got blamed for it, but anyway, they sent me back. They said, well, we don't have another plane right away, which was good news to me, so I went back up to Tinian, and they said, well, we can get you on a ship that's over in Saipan Harbor right now. Tinian didn't have a harbor per se. They parked out in the deeper water. We can send you right back on the ship, or you can wait and we'll get you another plane. And at that point, I thought that ship sounded a lot better. So I think I was about 24, 25 days from Saipan Harbor to, I think we stopped only in Honolulu for maybe a day or something like that, and then back into San Francisco. That's the way I got home. I still fly, I'm an active pilot and all that, but I wouldn't want to have tried to do a lifetime flying 29.
I did similar. Right after the war ended, they called us in and said, you got 31 missions, you can go home. And they flew me down to Guam, and there we got a plane. There's I forget what they call it, but it was air traffic contracted with the Army or to take people home. So they put us in a B-24, and what they did was they put plywood all over the bomb bay and everything so you wouldn't fall out. And then they put seats. They crowded it with as many seats as they thought they could, probably up to the weight of the plane could carry. And they flew us from Guam to Johnson Island, which was a stopover, and then from there to Hawaii, and then from there home. And the interesting part was that because it was the way it was loaded, they didn't want us getting out of our seat while we were flying. And that was a long trip.
I had not enough missions as Ed here, so I had to wait till my points mounted up and had a ship. So I came home by boat. One of the memorable things about that was, as I went over to Saipan to wait to load the ship to go home, I met Jimmy Braddock. And many of you here aren't old enough to remember Jimmy Braddock, the heavyweight champion. But I shook hands with him, and I'm a tall kid, got big hands. His hands looked like 5 times as big as mine when I shook hands with me. He's just a monstrous, big physique, just a great guy. And he was over there on his way home too.
I had kind of an unusual experience. Right after the war, the Army Air Corps conceived a plan by which they would try to fly 4 B-29s nonstop from Japan to Washington, D.C. And I was selected as one of the pilots to be on one of the planes of the 4. The whole thing was a hoax in that they weren't regular airplanes. They were brand new airplanes we picked up in Guam. They had been polished and waxed. They had been stripped of any armament. They had been stripped of any guns. The bomb bays were filled with bomb bay tanks. And on top of them was C-47 aluminum tanks stacked on top of the bomb bay tanks. The radar room was filled from floor to ceiling with C-47 tanks. C-47 tank is about probably 15 inches by 15 inches by 8 feet long, aluminum. And then these were garden hosed all together in a manifold and entered into the fuel system. The other thing that made it a hoax was that it wasn't a full crew. They didn't have in the newspapers that it wasn't a full crew. They just were silent on that subject. But we had 3 pilots, 2 flight engineers, 2 navigators, and an observer. And that made up the crew. The other thing they didn't say was you got to have about 100-mile-an-hour tailwinds if you're going to go that far. The other thing they didn't say was, with maximum gross takeoff weight as defined by Boeing of 120,000 pounds, we took off on a very cold morning with pressure-filled gas tanks. That's a dangerous thing to do. Weighing 141,000 pounds. And we made it. Non-stop, yeah. Wow. Interesting story. There was 2 of us who had been regularly flying missions were on that airplane, and the 3rd guy had been flying a desk. He was a major. And I don't know how he got selected, but anyway, he was selected. And as we approached International Airport in Washington, D.C., maybe half an hour out, the major says, "I want to sit in the left seat." So he sat in the left seat. We bowed to the authority of the officer. And of course what he was after, he wanted to be the guy that taxied by the movie cameras and waved out the window. He didn't realize how low the stall speed was going to be, as light as that airplane was at the time. He hadn't been flying for quite a while, and he hadn't flown probably that light ever. The result, he was too high, too hot, didn't touch the runway till about halfway down. Then he panicked, jammed on the brakes, skidded the tires, blew the tires out. We skidded off the end of the runway, did a cartwheel down there, and we had to be picked up by a truck and hauled back over to where the lights were. But anyway, we got home. That happened on November 1st. So we spent quite a bit of time getting prepared to go. And then we went up to Japan and waited there for these strong tailwinds. And we finally got some that looked like they might be decent. And by the way, for you guys who got some time as pilots, we flew max range, altitude, and fuel and manifold pressure, and that varies depending on your weight. And so we started out, probably flew the first hour maybe 50 feet or so, and then raised up maybe to a couple hundred feet, and then raised up, and every hour or so we changed altitude, and over the Aleutian change we got up to about 140,000 feet. And then a gradual letdown all across, diagonally across Canada, down to Washington. That's enough.
We're supposed to tell about how we got back, right?
Yeah.
I got back because I was blessed with a pilonidal cyst. A pilonidal cyst is where your spine comes together down above your asshole. I was blessed, and I was because of that. They I was in the hospital, and they says, "We're gonna fix this up, but but this needs to be handled in a hospital, and we're gonna send you home on a hospital ship." And before I went, they drained it and put a tape in there so it would drain, and while I was there, I went absent AWOL because they were at that time from Okinawa. They were sending people over to Shanghai, and just on the R&R, or little over thing, and I got out of my hospital bed and went down, got in line for the people going over to Shanghai. But they got there, and they had a list of people who were supposed to go there and stay there, and I wasn't on the list. But I went to Shanghai and did some shopping. Was on the town, absent without leave. But the war was over. The latitudes changed. A lot of things changed. But I went, brought home a chest with some silks and all kinds of trinkets, and come back, and he says, "Naughty, naughty." and I came home on the Admiral Rodman, which was a troop ship, and but I came home in a ward, and then the troop ship had there were about 6 or 8 in a stack of people, and it was just full of hauling people home because the war was over. But there were 6 of us who were sent home on a medical deal. So I got home early on the medical deal, and we had a couple of us. We had gone to the infirmary and got little boxes of, what was it? Some kind of medical alcohol, rum, or whatever it was, and we had the 6 of us. We went home in glory, and the 6 of us in a bay, and we each had our own bed, and they said, "Well, this ship is going to go through the Panama Canal and be decommissioned and turned over." And we said, "But we're going to stop in Hawaii. But nobody gets off. We're just going to take on some fuel and take on some supplies and everything." And then people were walking out there grabbing boxes and carrying them back there. And 3 of us on that ship, they were air sea rescue people on Okinawa. And the 3 of us, we just got off, and instead of picking up a box and going back on the ship, we just went up to the officers club and had a nice big dinner. Came back to the ship, and so what do you know? It was already leaving without us. We wired the ship. We didn't have orders. We didn't have anything. So we were on the way home. I said, "We got to get orders," and we wired the ship to send a copy of our orders, and they wired back, "These men are absent without leave." And so the 3 of us, we said, "Oh," the other 2 guys were air sea rescue people, and we went around and worked with air sea rescue there in Hickam, and the one guy says, "Well, it's been a while since I got flying, and in order to get my flight pay, I gotta go fly once in a while." And he went out and checked out an airplane and was up buzzing the Waikiki Beach, and somebody got his plane number. And he got to stay a little longer than the other 2 of us. But we flew back. We got off this thing. we don't want to go down through the Panama Canal and fiddle around. We want to go home. But I came home and got discharged, and I beat my wife's old boyfriend home, and we got married. Talk too much.
From a question from John Creek. What teachings, whether they're from your parents, the culture that you grew up in, school, the news media, made you willing and able to perform as you did on Tinian and during very long missions?
This is the hardball stuff now, isn't it?
This is the hardball stuff.
That's right.
Well, there's another hardball question coming after this, so.
Well, I was working in the bank, and before Pearl Harbor was bombed, and my mother and I was ready to go right then and there. And she says, they'll call on you pretty soon, and they did.
They did.
You have been selected. I was selected, and went down to, and this is too long a story. I'll just, but anyway, 6 of us were, they said, there's about 300 of you here, but you 6 guys is going to get on this train and go down to Biloxi, Mississippi, to the Biloxi Army Air Corps base. And we got on the thing and we got comparing notes, and 5 of the 6 of us had worked in banks, and the other guy had some financial background, and said, what are we gonna, what do I want us? They must have something special. They want us people with mathematics and numbers, some special purpose. We went through basic training, and this is an out. What was the question? I'm off. I'm off the subject.
Just the teachings of, your upraising, everything, that how they impacted your ability to perform.
Well, my whole mission all the time was like most of the young people we'd seen in the movies, and everybody wanted to be fighter pilots. Can you imagine that? But we went to thinking, but it looks like they've got some special plan for us. We went to classification, and they said, we are looking for cooks and truck drivers. You're a cook and you're a truck driver. You're a cook and you're a truck driver. And I went to cook school, and we said, another guy and I said, we don't want to tell our kids, if we ever have any, that we were in the big war, and we were in a cook. And we both applied for cadets, and I went into cadets.
Good. Mr. Vincent.
One word answer, my dad insisted on discipline, insisted on taking responsibility for things, and I think that was a big help to me in all of my military career.
Similarly, my dad was an attorney, my mother was a school teacher, and they insisted on my following the rules and the patriotic thoughts for our great country.
Well, I wanted to be in the Air Corps, and they finally got me. And to me, it was just a job. Where they sent me and what I had to do, it was just a job. And when the job ended, I came home.
Well, I guess I should pitch one for Mom, but the truth of the matter is my dad was the one I remember that made me whatever little bit I am. And so I'm like the other guys. I went down and signed up right after Pearl Harbor Day, but unfortunately I'd also acquired a wife at that time, and so and I was working at Boeing as supposedly a critical operation. So I didn't go active duty until 1943. But I do remember my dad was brokenhearted that he told me I should get in the service, but he was an ex-Marine, and my going into the Army Air Corps was a real slap in the face. But he was really tickled when I came home finally.
Last question from me. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, clearly I don't have the war stories to keep up with these gentlemen. It's an honor to be sitting here with y'all. But not having an opportunity to fire a shot in anger, I think I certainly appreciate the ability to be a part of the realistic force deterrent. You know, we're the big red, white, and blue cop car out there that hopefully keeps the Russians and so on from getting froggy, so to speak. So it's that deterrence that sets it apart for me. If we're out there doing what we're supposed to do, and we're all capable and trained, hopefully nobody ever has to pull a trigger or drop a bomb again. So,
thank you. Well, let's go back and start with you again here. And this one is from Larry Dananay. And I'll reword a little bit, but they're going to make a movie about the 6 bomb group. They're going to make a movie about your unit. And you get to direct the movie. What do you want the legacy of your unit to be?
well, for those of you who know, we've got the F-15 out here in Portland down there at the base, and long history of the Red Hawks. Even you go across to Pearson, you can see a patch that resembles this one as one of the observation groups, and they were able to participate in the Second World War as an observation squadron spotting submarines. We didn't see too many of them, I don't expect, but that was what they're there for. But we've kind of been a hometown unit, and as part of the Air National Guard, we are citizen airmen. I mean, I'm an airline pilot in my other life, and then we've got a firefighter. We got a Hood River parafarmer out there flying fighters defending America. So that's what we do. So as a hometown organization, I think that the real highlight is that, you know, here we are. We do deploy. We have a road show, if we said the away game, as we like to call it. But we are primarily, or have been through our history, a part of defending the Pacific Northwest, and that's kind of our legacy. And really, right now we have fighters that are loaded. I just ran one up this afternoon before I came down here and made sure all the missiles were tuned and everything's ready to rock at a moment's notice. So I think that's what it's really about. The Red Hawks here in Portland are here to defend the Pacific Northwest, and you know, if federal missions call us away, we'll go do that if we have to. But that's the real legacy of the unit's been here since you know, before the Second World War, and still in its current incarnation with our brand new 1979 F-15s. You know, so you guys, I was thinking about looking in the cockpit today, knowing I was going to come over here and get to talk to you guys. But oddly enough, you'd probably still recognize a couple of the instruments in our. We still have some, as we call them, the steam gauges up there with the altitude and airspeed and so on. It's still a drum, and we haven't gotten too fancy as of yet. But that would be the legacy, is just really the air defense unit thing. So.
Well, if you're going to make a movie, I don't know who you're going to show it to, but the company that I own has done a lot of business with the people that live up where we used to fly the missions and send the bombs to and stuff. And I've never had a single credit problem, never had any kind of the situations you have with some of our own people here in the continental U.S. and in Iran and other parts of the world when you're in the aircraft business. So I hope somehow we don't stir the pot and get everybody too excited. But the people that are there now are not seemingly like the people that we thought we were bombing then.
Well, our crew was kind of a Johnny-come-lately. I understood we were about the first replacement crew in the 6th Bomb Group. And the trouble with that was we didn't know anybody. And we heard all these stories and all this stuff about the 6th Bomb Group and all the things they had done up until the time we finally got in the 6th Bomb Group. And as a legacy, I think you should, we've got an awful lot of information. I think you should make it available, and if people want to read it, they can, and if people don't want to read it, they don't have to.
Interesting question, David. Legacy I would try to impart in any movie I would direct would be one that would instill in the people viewing it the true patriotism that we all feel, that we all felt during the war, that we have a beautiful country that we are defending. We have a beautiful country that we want to last, and that everyone should work together, be they civilians or military, to the point of ensuring that any of our enemies are deterred and all of our people have one forward thought in their mind, and that is to protect and forward the United States.
I would like to see the legacy be a portrayal of what really is the case. And I don't know if you've all heard these statistics, but the 6th Bomb Group, by a lot of different measures, was the best bomb group in the 20th Air Force. As measured by bombs on target, abortions per 100 flights, losses. By those measures, we were an outstanding group in the 20th Air Force. And the why of that is, I think, in part because we trained together, went over together. The crews were well trained. We had a good commander. One of the things that some of you may not have heard, we had a policy in the 6th Bomb Group, forwarded by our commanding officer, that nobody ever flew on a crew that he didn't like everybody. And as a result, all any crew member had to do was to say, I don't want to fly with that guy. That guy then is off the crew with no questions asked. Airplane commander couldn't say, why did you tell that you don't want that guy on the crew? He didn't have to answer. He couldn't even ask the question. So we had something going for us that some crews didn't have. Everybody on every crew liked the guy he was flying with. And I think that helped. Another thing that may have helped, and I think it did, before every mission, our chaplain came around to every airplane. We had a prayer before we took off on a mission. And so that's the legacy I'd like to see shown.
I just want to say how much I appreciate your answers for this thing, and I don't have any way to improve on your answers.
I want to close with this from Mr. Newell Penniman's diary, and I have the diaries on CDs. They're all the people who've contributed diaries, and it's our goal to try to get as many of these, accumulate as many of these, so that we can then pass them on, so that as your legacy will be told for years to come. Mr. Penniman, who I don't even know if I can talk about it, because he's a powerful writer. And I took his diary with me when I was going to Tinian one time, and so that I could read it on the plane going over. And so when I got there, I shared it with a lady named Carmen Sanchez, and she was the Historical Preservation Office. She was the chairman of the Historical Preservation Office. And so she said, may I read it? So we were going out onto the fields and everything, and I came back, and she was sitting at her desk crying. And she was talking about how Mr. Penniman was a single child. His mother had died before the war, and yet his daddy allowed him to go. But his closing statement in his diary, I'll read it for you, and then we'll take a break and ask the ladies to come up, or if any of you have questions. He says, I have done the best I can to write about my war years and experiences. However, you can't through jotting down your remembrances, truly put the reader in your shoes. The tension of the takeoffs with about 138,000 pounds gross weight, including over 7,000 gallons of high-octane gas and 10 tons of bombs, can never be passed on to a reader of these memoirs. It can't be done. You yourself would have had to be there as we bounced down the runway hoping and praying. The only voices to be heard were those of the airplane commander and the pilot as they checked off increasing airspeed, etc. The rest of the crew were praying in silence. Dear God, please help us survive another takeoff, another mission, and return us safely to Tinian. Amen.
Yes.
Now, if anybody else has questions, please bring them forward. Steve, Rennie.
I'm sorry, I could ask you questions all night if that was. I'm humbled to be in the presence of you gentlemen, and I thank you for your service. And having read my uncle's letters, I felt a great deal of what he went through, 6 Bomb Group, and a great deal of what he felt about the rest of his unit. And I would have given my right arm to have met Newell Pennyman, but I've read his stuff too, and he said nice things about my uncle, and I'm very grateful for that. I could ask dozens of questions here, but I won't. Getting back to what you were talking about, the music, the movies. My uncle wrote, and he's from southeast Nebraska, so he understood about Nebraska. He wrote that he was disgusted by Grand Island. He said it's Nebraska's 3rd largest city, and he was disgusted by it. And he said he's never seen so many bitter, drunken soldiers hanging around, and it was a big hole. I want to know what it was like to be in Grand Island, because he's really piqued my interest there. Was it as bad as he portrayed it? I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
You already have.
Well, my pre-war or my wartime memories of the people in Grand Island, I guess I wasn't in the right circles or something, but they were wonderful people. That the few that I ran into, because I didn't get into town very much, I didn't have a lot of money to spend or anything to do like that. But I will say that after World War II and after we formed the 6 Bomb Group reunion here, or 6 Bomb Group company or organization, that we put some, I kind of spearheaded putting up a monument in Grand Island. That propeller monument out at the Veterans Place was assembled at my place in my business in Everett, Washington, and torn down and shipped back there and put back up. And I've never ran into a better group of people in all of my business or life career than the people in Grand Island. Like Grand Island Public Utilities, for free, came over with their lift truck and lifted that big propeller up and put it up on that big pipe monument they've got, and they were just wonderful to deal with. I'm an Okie by birth, but I grew up in Washington, but I really have a soft spot in my heart for the Middle Easterners or Middle Westerners, or whatever Grand Island is. It's the center of the U.S. For all the cooperation we had there, and we've had a couple of reunions there, so you tell the people in Grand Island that Virgil Morgan remembers him as the good old
I was a Johnny-come-lately. We never got to Grand Island. We spent all our time down in Alamogordo, New Mexico, so I can't talk about it.
Obviously, having my bride from Grand Island, I thought very well of it. And frankly, her having worked, she was a bank teller, and I visited her home and there, and we were very welcomed by the Grand Island people, all of us in the 6 Bomb Group, and our own crew, the Lucky Strike crew, had our own reunions besides 6 Bomb Group. And I can't remember, it was the 5th or the 10th reunion that we had, and we went back to Grand Island. And the city put out a spread for us that you would never imagine could ever be done for anybody. We were the toast of the town for a week in Grand Island. They put a big banquet on for us. Pictures and stories were all through the papers, and we have nothing. We had and have nothing but the greatest love for Grand Island.
Your uncle was associating with the wrong people. As he just said, they were great Midwest common folks, and they appreciated having us as part of their community, and we all liked them.
I wasn't there.
Can I say something on this one? I agree with you. I was born in Grand Island because of the 6 Bomb Group. Oh, it's actually true. Most of these were German farmers in Hall County. You might think Grand Island, Nebraska is in the middle of nowhere. However, Hall County was one of the most strategic counties in the United States during the war effort. If you look at an aerial map to this day, you can see there were 3 huge ammunition plant assembly lines, which consist of the entire western half of the county. That was the largest Army ammunition plant. My grandmother worked there in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, building bazooka shells and 500-pound bombs. On the eastern half, the northeast corner, is the Grand Island Army Air Base, and it was active with F-106 fighters. They had an air defense mission up until the late 1970s, and there still to this day are 3 basically guard type of hangars up there. The middle of the town was where the Luftwaffe POWs were kept. And Virgil knows this because my mom was 17 years old, and they would go down and talk in German to the POW officers that were actually housed in the elementary school. So while you had guys going off, and most of the B-17 wings that had gone to Europe actually launched from Grand Island. So these guys that wrote their diaries, they said Grand Island was the last piece of United States real estate that they saw before heading across the Atlantic. So they had nothing but fond memories for the people of Hall County. So thanks.
Any other questions? I know yes ma'am. We're going to have the ladies, we're going to take a break and then have the ladies.
No, I'd like to ask a question of our young airmen.
Yes ma'am.
Obviously, you've gotten a perspective from our older Air Force gentlemen. Being in the Air Force now and doing what you do in the National Guard, give us a perspective of how you think the Air Force is today and what the future is going to be for it.
It is obviously an amazing difference. When you read any of the stories or talk to these gentlemen, you talk about the flight. We kind of made a joke about the flight over the Missouri. The term we use is the aluminum overcast. And just these airplanes for days and resources for days. We had a gentleman retire out not long ago, and he actually flew in the Gulf War with the Navy before he transitioned. He's lives down in Lake Oswego. Mark Dunham, great guy. But as his going away retirement video, his wife put together this great compilation, and there's this video of what the Navy refers to. I apologize for talking about the Navy here. What the Navy refers to as the fly-off, because when the boat gets close enough, the airplanes leave because they're going to leave the ship anyway, and everybody else is left to stay behind. But all of these airplanes, the entire air wing, everything flyable gets off the deck, and it's the same thing. It's the aluminum overcast, and I fly around at best in a formation of 4, and on a good day, maybe 8 airplanes with some other supporting assets, and we're marshaling in concert, but not in no way like what these gentlemen did. And just to think of the ungangly, arduous nature of so many airplanes in the same piece of sky without contacting each other is just, it's unfathomable. But at my age, what we do, and there's so many things electronically, the equipment has become dramatically, we're leaps and bounds above our peers in a lot of ways, not really peers, but our competitors. And it's very smart stuff. So we have, highly capable. It's kind of been the Air Force's mantra, really. I mean, even in the Second World War, but since then, to have higher tech, higher capable, better trained people, whereas some other Air Forces, Russia, uses a lot more numbers, and they try to do the overwhelm thing, which we executed, I think, in the Second World War, which is we had just tons of numbers. And now, so we're much, they say the term leaner, and they like to say do more with less, but we're much leaner force by all respects in this group you see up here, and the amount of assets that we're able to as a country generate. And I mean, look at what you did in one. I mean, what would be a day of sorties off of Tinian? I mean, on a good day, how many sorties would you generate?
I have no idea.
In the hundreds?
Yes.
800.
Oh gosh, the entire U.S. Air Force could probably be hard pressed to generate 300 or 400 sorties in a day. So it's a lot smaller for us, and in a lot of ways that's a blessing because we don't need to have as much as we did back then. So it's smaller, leaner. I mean, I think we're pretty skilled and talented with what we have, but it's definitely not the monster that we had in 1945 there in August. So.
But they didn't have cell phones.
We're not supposed to have those in the airplanes. It's a security risk.
I only have one more question for you. Do you have enough?
For what?
For whatever might occur.
It's kind of an interesting question. If you were a combatant commander in whatever, pick the theater, CENTCOM, or PACOM out here in the Pacific Air Force, where most of these gentlemen cut their teeth, you'd argue that depending on what we're dealing with, you have an insatiable appetite for forces. I mean, if you're the PACOM commander, how many F-15s and F-22s do you want? The answer is all of them, right? And then make more. So there's always that argument, do you try to balance? I mean, we're definitely living in a resource-constrained environment, and we have what we have. I mean, my name is painted on an airplane that was built in 1985, and that's the newest, 1986, the newest F-15 we have on Pang Base. F-22s, they stopped stamping those out, I want to say, they closed the line down, 6 years ago? So, and we're building F-35. So, arguably, if we wanted to fight a two-theater war, we'd have our challenges, but it's, you always want, what did more is always better, right? The principle of mass, as referenced by the 400 sorties off of Tinian.
Your comment does worry me. Allow me to quote someone that maybe some of you have heard this. It's a recent quote. The United States military was not built to create war. It was built to stop war.
Absolutely.
The size of our military is there so nobody challenges us.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have the biggest, the best, the most. And if we don't have it, we've got a problem.
We still have the largest Air Force in the world, and I think clearly the best trained and best equipped. That doesn't mean that we don't need to continue to to update what we have and continue to train and try to get better. But it's always a constant battle. But hopefully we are. That's like I say, I like to rest on that if we train well enough and we're equipped well enough, we'll be a deterrence and nobody will ever try.
Don't forget the vote next year.
John, I think when we were on Tinian, that was when the B-52 pilot came down from Guam.
Yes.
And I was shocked because on Northfield Tinian, at the end of the war, there were over 800 B-29s in the Pacific, in the 20th Air Force. There were over 180 on Northfield alone. And on maximum effort missions, I mean, they would just take off on all four runways, boom, down the runway. And people would come out and watch for hours these B-29s take off on maximum effort missions. There were 180, if you say each group had 45, and there were 4 groups on Northfield plus the 509th, that's 100, and they had 45, that's 180, and there's probably more, to be honest with you. But we now have in the neighborhood of 72 B-52s that are operational in the United States Arsenal, and we have like 42 B-1s. So I mean, on Tinian, there were more bombers on North Field than we have in the United States Air Force today. One last thing, and then we'll get the ladies up here, with Steve, and Steve contacted me about his uncle, and this is also from Mr. Penniman's diary. He said, one lasting memory of Grand Island was when we returned from our Christmas leave on December 23rd. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, my bombardier, John Sable, and I were coming out of the bar at the Officers Club in the Visitors Lounge when Lloyd Rennie, who I had been with all through navigation, gunnery, and radar school, called me over to introduce me to his mother, father, and sister who lived in Nebraska and were visiting him for the last time before we shipped out to Kearney Air Force Base. I was sort of sorry or envious that he should be with his family for Christmas, and my father and I were 2,000 miles apart. Poor Lloyd's crew was the first of the 6-bomb group to land on Tinian on January the 18th, 1945, and also the first crew of the 24th Squadron to be lost in a combat mission. Every Christmas season, Lloyd and the fate of his crew always comes to my memory, and since that time, I have tried to stop being envious of any other person. So anyway, we'll take a break and get the ladies up here.
The women were back at home. The women were experiencing the wartime at home. And that was an experience also that is something that many of us really don't know anything about. And so that's why we thought this time we'd just let the women have something to say. And this doesn't have, they did not have to be married to a 6-bomb group, but the guys, you know, many of them were in high school, probably, or in school. And so they met their husbands maybe later, or met them while they maybe were in high school, possibly. But we just want to know about their experiences during the war. So my first question to them is, do you remember on December 7th when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Do you remember how that affected your family? Do you remember what you thought? Did you think it was something really serious, or did you not really comprehend really the whole scope of what it meant at the time? How did your family react? So tell us just about December 7th.
What's the question?
Yeah, Millie, it's where were you on December 7th?
What's that?
Where were you on December 7th when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Okay.
Oh.
Well, actually, I was in the 8th grade, and I was walking downtown to meet a girlfriend in what we call the Chatterbox. And I heard about it when we got down there, and of course, it really didn't make that big an impression. I mean, you heard the words, but what does that really mean? But we found out shortly after.
Well, about the same. I was in a movie theater at that time, and it was announced. They stopped the film and announced that. And you knew something terrible had happened, but you really couldn't appreciate the consequence of it. I was only a baby.
Well, I'm from this little town called Superior, Wisconsin, which is out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember that we were attending a concert, and we were listening to the Messiah, and they announced about the war. Well, Superior, Wisconsin, and the war were miles apart, you know. And we wanted them to stop talking about that and let's finish the concert.
Well, I remember it very well. I grew up in a very small town, Arlington, Washington, which you probably never heard of. But Virgil and I went to the same school together, and I was from a very poor family. We didn't have news media. They didn't have TVs. Okay. Well, anyway, I didn't hear about it until in school. That came over the loudspeaker that we were at war. And of course, we all knew it was bad, but I think I'm definitely too young to comprehend what it was all about. I didn't have any brothers, so that was the one thing that's just what I remember.
Yeah.
I really don't think we knew where Pearl Harbor was.
Yeah,
You're right.
I apologize. Let's start with introducing yourselves and tell us where you were living at the time during World War II. So, Elaine, your name? Your name?
Well, I was still living in LA.
What?
Where were we living at that time? Elaine Angel, an art angel, was
Where were I
overseas.
born?
I was actually in high school. And I tell you, we were a loud bunch of kids. And I really don't have any recall of what Pearl Harbor meant. And everybody was saying, oh, everybody was talking about Pearl Harbor. What's Pearl Harbor? And we never really got it until we got back in the classroom. And the teacher that we had, I can't remember her name anymore, but she explained it all. Mm-hmm. And it still didn't mean a whole lot to us because we were just having too good a time. Mm-hmm. It was really a sad thing for that. But later on we understood, and it made a lot of difference. And
Introduce yourself and where were you living?
My name is Lynn Creek. I was living in St. Charles, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. You heard of it? Really? Really, where? Well, how about that? How about 15 years later, we find out we're neighbors. And I had a mother and a sister, and my sister was married to someone who had just recently joined the Air Corps.
I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I was born. And what was the rest of it? Oh, Maxine Higgins.
And I was born in this little town called Superior, Wisconsin.
I don't know, I guess I said this before. My name is Nellie Morgan. I lived in this little town of Arlington that I just mentioned. And by the way, I was born in Nebraska.
Would you tell us, did you have anyone in your family go into the service? Like a brother, an uncle, a father? Your next door neighbor, did you know someone that had to go into the service because of the war?
I don't know if it was the war or not, but my brother joined the Navy and was in, I think, off of New York someplace in a boat. And he never was over in the Pacific at all. And
Manic bomb and destroyer escort.
what? All right.
Which was not a boat, that was a ship.
That was a ship.
Anyway, that's the only person I know, except the only other person I did know was related to my mother. It was someone he knew very well, and he was over in the Pacific Theater in Japan, and he had come back a couple of times. He went back and forth. He was some sort of, I don't know what it is, but he was always in what do you call it, helicopter, and he'd come to our house and be there for a while, and next thing he was gone back to Japan. So I don't know what he was doing, but he was doing something about the war, and he was working with a general. But that's the only other thing I had going on about that. And the rest of us, the kids, we really just went, it was completely normal. None of us had any impression and understanding. And I think it's a shame because we really didn't get anything from the teachers. Very, very little. And And I don't know of any of them that had any really tight situations with the forces or anybody else. And I think it's kind of sad. I'm back that way.
Well, I had no brothers. The closest I come to was my sister's husband. However, when the war started at Pearl Harbor, my sister was 8 years older than I was, and several of her friends had already joined the Navy, and they were at Pearl Harbor, and they were deceased at Pearl Harbor.
Well, what was the question again?
Where were you?
Do you know anyone that served?
Oh,
or was
that
called?
served in
Yeah.
the service,
Yeah.
yes. I had two older cousins that both were, then joined the Navy. And my brother was 2 years younger than I, but the war lasted, as you know, a number of years. So at the end of the war, or a year or two before it ended, he joined the Marines too. So that was a great concern of mine. But I also realized a lot of what was going on in Europe, since I heard about it from my family. We had cousins in Yugoslavia, in Slovenia, and some of them were already in the camps and were not working, but they were partisans and lived in the mountains, and they lived very poorly. They didn't have clothes, and I remember our parents sending boxes of clothing over to them and to help in the meantime.
I had 5 brothers, and I'm the only girl. Guess who was called Queenie? Anyway, my youngest brother was too young for the war, but my 4 brothers, 2 were older. One was in the Army, one was in the Air Force, and 2 were in the Navy. And I can still see my mother being very proud of these boys and having their picture up. And I think she had it on the front window so everybody would know where her sons were.
Well, the gold stars,
Yeah.
gold star flags.
Well, I think, as I said before, I didn't have any
Louder.
Oh, sorry.
Close.
I think I said before, I had no brothers, and the only person in my family that was in the military was my very favorite uncle from Nebraska.
Yeah. Good for Nebraska. Can you tell us how rationing affected your family? What do you remember about it? What were you able to buy? What could you not buy? How were you limited in terms of what you could have? What do you remember about the days during the war when you were rationing?
Well, we didn't have much difficulty with rationing. We lived in a rather comfortable situation. But my grandmother seemed to have a few things that she liked to get, and she would have me stand in line to get them. And usually they were stockings, and they were silk stockings. And it was a big thing to get that. And then there were some supplies that would come and needed in the house. Actually, it was an apartment, and she would live there for a long, long time. And I can tell you sort of a strange story, too, about the neighbor next door. Well, I was a teenager, a very busy teenager, doing everything and everything. And I had a crush on this guy. He did not know I existed. And this went on for a number of years, and he was in the service. And of course, he had a uniform, and he was absolutely gorgeous. And so later on in life, and in fact, just maybe 5 years ago, I was with a group of my friends, and maybe it's 5 years anyway. This particular person was there, and he didn't recognize me, but I recognized him, and I never said a thing. But he was married to one of my friends, and I never knew it. And it was very strange to have that kind of thing go back into your life. However, we really weren't hurt a lot by the rationing and this. Another thing that we were doing during the war years is a group of us were very active in the U.S. What was it? USO, right.
Yeah.
And we had the opportunities of going there and entertaining with the young men that were there. We also went out to, was invited out to Marchfield, and they got us in a truck, and we went out there, and my friend was a Spanish dancer, and we sang, and we played board games, we did everything, and kept them busy and happy for a few hours, and that's about all I remember about that time. Thank you.
Well, basically, as far as rationing was concerned, we suffered mostly from meat, sugar, butter. Yeah, so there's always gas for an A coupon, 3 gallons a week. But the thing I think really made the biggest impression on me, because I was in high school, we were allowed 2 pairs of shoes a year. Ooh, is right. And as a teenager, which of course doesn't compare at all to teenagers today, it was difficult to get along with 2 pairs of shoes. Now my sister had a baby, and so occasionally she was kind enough to give me one of hers. So it gave me a little up. But when my husband, who at that time I didn't even know, came back from service, he was very quick within about 3 weeks after he was discharged to go back to his home in Indiana and get us a half a beef and a pig. And we had lots of meat after that, which we all enjoyed.
Well, they've covered a lot of things that I remember too. The saving of the ration. Well, we had a ration book for this and that, and but we didn't ever go without anything. There was always enough to eat. Just limited. And the silk stockings, I remember standing in lines around the block to whenever it was announced that there were stockings available. And of course, the buying of the war bonds, and you would in school buy your stamps and then fill up a book so you could buy a bond. And of course, that took forever for. And when we were young, you didn't come across a quarter that easily. And you had the story about a boyfriend. Well, I had one too. He really wasn't. He was just a young man that walking through the halls in high school. He was always smiling at me, and he was just so adorable. He had the sweetest smile, and just a lovely guy. And I heard later that he was killed, and that was really shattering to us. And of course, we all had the gold stars in the window, and so that was about. Oh, yeah.
No, okay.
Well, I'm done.
As far as rationing, the only other thing I wanted to add as far as was toothpaste. When you got, somebody agrees with me there. When the tube was empty, you took it back to get another tube. Otherwise, no. I remember that, right.
Well, I remember also selling war bonds. I was going to college at the time, and I was in charge of selling war bonds. So that was really nice. And then, as you say, we had a shortage. You couldn't buy nylons. They wanted to do something in the army. So I don't remember what we wore for stockings. And then also, there was a kind of a shortage of food. So we were supposed to plan what they called a victory garden. And so we didn't have very much property in my house in Superior, Wisconsin, so I had to go across the street and plant my victory garden across the street. And so that was kind of a thrilling thing for me. And then that's all I think I got to report.
Well, I guess I never thought very much about the rationing because I never felt it was that difficult for us here at home. I felt a lot more, well, I thought it was so much more important for our people, God bless you people, that were fighting the war. You were the people that needed it. I didn't feel like we hurt. The only real memorable thing I have regarding the rationing was my girlfriend and I drove to guess where? Portland, to a wedding. And of course, you know, we couldn't get tires. And between Seattle and Portland, we had 5 flat tires. But every single time we had a flat tire, there was a serviceman that came along and repaired our tire. God bless you all.
I remembered something else. We all in high school were knitting socks and scarves for the servicemen. And there was always writing letters. You never know who they went to, but we wrote whatever we could and sent it on.
Yeah, that was my next question is, was there anything that you did for the servicemen like that you mailed packages or anything of that nature? Do you remember anything like that?
Well, we made squares at the Red Cross.
What was the question again?
Anyway, when it was
Did we ever
whatever, the Afghans or whatever they made, and they were sent there, they had gloves, they had scarves.
Just a second.
What?
Get the mic up closer to your mouth.
I used to probably work without it. Anyway, this is the kind of thing, my grandmother got me into that. And I did that for a long time, and I had a great Red Cross pin, and when they did all different kinds of things like this for the soldiers. And I lived in an apartment house, and there was family that he was a major, and he had 2 kids, and his wife, they lived in the same building. And when he came back, they went out a lot, and I was a babysitter for the 2 girls. And I got 70 cents an hour, which was outlandish at that time. And it was, but, well, I did a lot. I had to take care of their food, and I had to make sure they went to bed and all this sort of thing. But little things like that sort of pop into your thoughts every while, now and again. But we really didn't have it terribly rough. I think maybe we're just insensitive, or it wasn't spoken to us, difficulties that existed. And as I said, we were a group of kids that seemed to be pretty happy.
Well, do you remember making anything or sending anything to soldiers?
Well, Basically, it was knitting. My grandmother knit, and she taught me how to knit, and we made scarves and squares and things of that nature. But other than that, really, where I was, there wasn't much of that type of thing going on. Basically, in the high school, we were having a good time. And even though things were short, I think that all of us were smart enough to figure out just because we didn't have it, it needed to go to the war effort. We didn't need it badly enough to, sacrifice stuff for the soldiers.
I think I answered that one already.
Well, we tried to write to as many servicemen as we could. That was kind of fun. I didn't tell Bob that. But having my 4 brothers in the service, and we knew the servicemen liked to receive letters. So and of course stamps were only 3 cents back then, And so we tried to write to as many servicemen as we could.
Okay, at that time, I did not yet know how to knit, so I didn't do that. I love to bake. I love to bake pies, but you don't ship pies very well. So I made zillions of cookies, and I'm all baked out of cookies.
I remember my mother one time telling me about, in Illinois, going to the train station and just going and waving goodbye to soldiers that were leaving. And I just wonder, did any of you ever go see people off in that manner?
I had no opportunity and no reason to be doing something like that. Well, I'm being honest, I really didn't. The war was such something out here that I missed. It really, I feel like I was rather stupid at the time. And we were having good times. Basically, we were high school kids, and we were young, and we didn't see what was really happening. Even the newsreels were almost like fiction. It didn't hit. And I can't completely say that I felt good about it, but we all just went on with our lives, and we were not hampered in any major way. I think as the war went on, we all sort of got used to all of these things that we weren't really deprived or anything else. But we began to catch on by the time we were, a little bit older, and we heard about people's families and different things that happened. And we just were just what we were. We were just not anything special. We still played basketball. We didn't get to always go to the football games. We didn't always get to go to the beach. But all these things were just minor things when you think about it. And that's basically what we were. I think if I asked 10 people in the room at that age, they might feel a different way, but they might feel the same way too.
Well, I pretty much agree with you. I do, because, the war started, I was in 8th grade. And, that's as prior to my high school years. Well, my high school years were fun. It was basketball games and football games and dances and proms and everything that the typical teenager goes through. Even though we did have these other things that were shortage, it really didn't make that big an impact. And it was
the shoes.
Oh, the shoes. The shoes do make an impact. But basically, that's the way it was. You didn't really give it any thought. The fact that you couldn't have it, well, that's just the way it was. It's like minding your mother or your dad when they tell you do. It's the same thing.
Well, there was a shortage of men around, and boys. but we tried our best. And yeah, we did go to a prom or two, and there was always maybe one that we'd pass around. Well, we did. Boyfriend for 6 months, and then somebody else would crack down. But that's what happened. But it was shattering when I had to wave off my brother on a train loaded with soldiers, or Marines in that case, going off to Camp Pendleton. And that was far away from Wisconsin.
I don't remember sending my brothers off to war. I feel real bad about that.
Well, I was just a poor little country girl, and we lived out in the country, and so I wasn't in a position where I was any place where I would see any of the people going off to war. But I saw a lot of it later.
Yeah, if you heard anything about the end of the war, whether it was in Europe or the Japan surrendering, do you remember any celebrations in your family or in town? What did that mean? Do you remember the end when it was announced?
I think that when I first heard about it, it seemed to me that, like you said, we were in the movies or something going on, and it was announced, and then everything went right on. It wasn't until we started hearing on the radio. We didn't see any television from that for a long time. That they showed pictures and things like that. So we began to take an interest in what had happened. And we didn't even understand why some of the students in school that were Japanese kids were suddenly gone. And things began to take our interest, so to speak, and a little bit of understanding, but we really were so ignorant of what was actually going on. So the war was over. Oh, good, the war was over. I'd have to stand in line for stockings. I mean, it's kind of a sad situation, really. I think we all in this generation really did have a hard time with accepting the fact that we were actually at war and people were really being killed and people were suffering and this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't close enough.
Well, it wasn't. We weren't close enough to it. Am I right?
I agree with that, and I think I lived in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Well, I lived in the Midwest, and so consequently, I don't think we felt it there other than with the rationing. I think those people who lived on the coast, east and west, were more aware of what was going on than probably those of us who lived in the Midwest. But it just so happened when the European war ended, I was in the vicinity of the Chicago area. Some of my girlfriends and I had gone in to visit somebody, and there was a lot of jubilation going on. And I actually don't even remember about other than the fact that the Japanese surrendered. I don't remember it being a big deal in our town, but of course it was. But yeah, I agree with her. I mean, we were just kids. We really didn't know the ins and outs and ups and downs that went on, and we didn't get news like you get news today, where you know every single thing that goes on every single day. So consequently, we were kind of in the dark.
One of the exciting things that would happen during the war, there were always drives to sell bonds, buy bonds. And in Milwaukee, there was one occasion where they brought, like big wagons loaded with a band. Glenn Miller, I know Kay Kaiser had his own band, and they would go down the street in downtown Milwaukee, playing their music and buying bonds, and everybody ran downtown and was a part of the scene. It was really quite jubilant. And after the war, they also, as soon as you heard the news on the radio, everyone ran down in the center of downtown Milwaukee and was screaming, and like you see the pictures of what happened in New York at that time.
I don't remember too much about the end of the war. As I recall, we didn't do any celebrating, and I knew I didn't have to sell any more war bonds. And we were kind of lucky. Some people were talking about a food shortage, which of course there was. But our family was lucky because my grandparents had a farm, and they brought in meat and potatoes. I remember eating a lot of meat and potatoes. But outside of that, I don't remember getting all excited about the end of the war or my brothers. I don't know if I was too excited about having 4 brothers come home.
I think what I remember most was wondering how long it would take for those of you that were out there fighting, how long it would take you to come home. And I know a lot of them, it took a lot of months before they got home. And I remember shedding bitter tears for all the ones we knew, the heroes that didn't come home. That was the hardest part for me.
Thank you.
Speaking of schools and what they were learning, I do remember my husband, who was in elementary school at that time, my late husband, he said that they were in school given papers that had shapes of airplanes that the Japanese flew, and they had to memorize what those airplanes looked like. And he was in Bellingham, Washington, which was, of course, a coastal town, and he said we all would be looking up in the sky all the time waiting for the Japanese to fly over. Man, we were going to report them right away. But they were told to look, be aware of submarines because they were in a harbor town, and the Japanese airplanes. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing in elementary school that they were taught. I want to thank the women.